Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. This week, we're going to learn a weekly Torah portion of Vayishlach. If you are following in the blue Art Scroll Chumash, you can find it on page 170. If you have any questions as the class is going on, feel free to type it into the chat box so we could have a conversation just like we would in a regular class. I look forward to your participation. So, this week's Torah portion is the story of Yaakov returning home. He spent 20 years in the house of his uncle Lavan. He fled because he took his brother's blessings and his brother wanted to kill him and he had to run for his life. He took his mother's advice to go to the house of his uncle Laban. Now, someone said that running from your problems is a race you'll never win. So ultimately, you have to come back, as they say, and face the music. So Yaakov decides it's time to go home. He brings his wives. At this point, he has 4 wives. He also has 11 sons and 1 daughter. His 12th son, his youngest son, Benjamin, will be born in this week's Torah portion. So Yaakov is heading home, and he decides that he has to go face his brother now after 20 long years. And he knows that his brother had sworn to take revenge and kill him. But now he has to go home because he can't stay in the house of Laban anymore. Laban has become envious of him because of his success. And so he's forced to go home. He also wants to see his parents, who he hadn't seen in many, many years. And just want to point out to you that rabbis say everything is measure for measure. The world, is quid pro quo, as they say. So because Jacob did not fulfill the mitzvah of honoring his father and mother for these, between his 20 years in the house of Laban plus the 2 years of traveling, so he was away from his father and mother for 22 years, that he was not able to fulfill the mitzvah of honoring father and mother. He was later deprived of his son, Joseph, when he was sold into slavery and into Egypt for 22 years, that as a punishment for his not being able to be present for his parents, his son Joseph was not present for him. But now he's coming home with his family and his wives, children. He also has a lot of flock, and he has to face his brother. So how does he get ready to confront his brother? And by the way, this strategy that Yaakov creates has remained as the blueprint in all future Jewish generations, because Jews unfortunately have been in the same predicament as Jacob time and again, where Esav, metaphorically the arch enemy of the Jews, swears or threatens to kill the Jews. There's no shortage of that in history, and even in our present day. We just saw what happened in Iran on Friday. The top scientist was killed. Presumably it was Israel, although nobody knows for sure. And, we're dealing with the Esavs of the world who threaten, just like Esav threatened Jacob, to kill him. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with anti-Semites? How do we deal with people who want to see our destruction? So we look in the Torah and we see, what did the first Jew, Jacob, do? Not the first Jew, Abraham was the first Jew, but the first Jew confronted with the threat of annihilation. And now Jacob is not just an individual, he's a family man. He has a family to protect. He has wives, he has children. How's he going to protect them? What's he going to do? So if you look in the verses, our rabbis point out, you find that he took a 3-pronged approach. In one word, the rabbis say he prepared Lidoran, Litfilah, Ulamilchama. Lidoran means presents, gifts. Litfilah is prayer. Lemilchama is war. In other words, Jacob said, the first thing I'm going to do is try what we today call diplomacy. I'll send my brother a goodwill delegation with gifts and nice words and try to win him over in a peaceful way. In addition to that, no matter what happens, I'm going to pray to God that the outcome should be positive. And there should be a peaceful resolution to this conflict. And finally, if all else fails, what do you got to do? You got to go to war. You got to fight. So Jacob says, I'm ready to fight. And he comes up with a strategy where he divides his family into two camps. And if he attacks one, the other one will attack, and so on and so forth. And this is what we do till today. The first way to resolve a conflict is obviously with diplomacy. But if diplomacy doesn't work, if you can't make peace with your enemies, you have no choice but to go and fight and defend your life and the lives of your family members. And of course, as a Jew, we always turn to Hashem and ask for his divine blessing and assistance in whatever we're going to do. So that is the threefold approach of Jacob: gifts, and the Torah describes how he sent this delegation to his brother with these beautiful words. And one of the words he says in the message that he sends to his brother is, so says your servant Jacob. He's showing extreme humility to his brother. And I've lived with Laban, I've become very successful, and I'm sending you all of these gifts. I'm sending you oxen and donkeys, flocks, servants and maidservants, all as a gift to find favor in your eyes. And our rabbis say, what do we see from here? That in the effort to make peace, we need to show humility. We need to prostrate ourselves before others and show them that we want to reconcile with them, no matter what. If we let go of our egos and we show them great respect, maybe they'll have the will to forgive and to make peace. And we have to do anything to avert conflict, war, God forbid, bloodshed and death. So Yaakov says, so says your servant Jacob, saying, I'm just your servant. I've sent you all these gifts. And the Torah describes how he spaced out the animals so it should look like a very elaborate gift, be very impressive to his brothers. He's doing everything he can to win over his brother. And then after he does that, he turns to God and he prays. And what does he say to God? He says, God, you're the God of my forefathers, Abraham and Isaac. You promised me I should go back to I can go home and I'll be okay. You told me to return to Israel. He was going with God's assurance. He says, I feel humbled because of all the kindness that you've done to me. You've already been so good to me up until now. I crossed this Jordan with my walking stick, and look at me now. I have a large family. Please rescue me. These are the crux of his words of prayer. Hatzileinina, save me. Rescue me, deliver me from the hand of my brother Esau, because I'm afraid of him, lest he come and kill mothers and children. And you told me, God, that you will do good to me. You will make my children, my offspring, my descendants like the stars in the heaven and like the sand on the seashore. Please fulfill this promise. And then he also prepares for war. Unfortunately, the messengers that he sent returned to him, and they say, we went to meet your brother. They thought they're going to find him, in Israel, and they're going to bring him this message. But they say to Yaakov, your brother is coming towards you, and he has 400 men, and he's coming to kill you. So this is the opening scene of this week's Torah portion. The tension, the heightened threat, as the messengers of Jacob return and say, your brother Esau is heading towards you to kill you. As I mentioned to you, this remains the paradigm for all future conflicts, to always pray to God, always try to resolve things peacefully, but at the same time, be prepared for battle if necessary. Now, I just want to point out that every story in the Torah is not just a story about it in history that happened, and not just a roadmap for the future, but it's also a personal story. Meaning, within each and every one of us, we know in Jewish thought there is the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, the good inclination and the bad inclination. We all have holy, righteous, noble, pure instincts, and we also have very negative, base, selfish, even ugly and repulsive instincts that we're ashamed of. And that's normal, actually, because we all have a good inclination, Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, or some people refer to it as the godly soul and the animal soul. But it's also referred to as Jacob and Esau. And Jacob and Esau are at war with each other. Why? Because Esav, meaning the Yetzer Hara, his whole mission in life, he's an angel, but his mission is to challenge you and to try to tempt you to succumb to wrongdoing. Now, why would God implant a Yetzer Hara in a human being? Because I'll just give you a story that illustrates it. There was a rabbi in Yerushalayim, his name was Rabbi Shradron. And one day he noticed that a yeshiva boy was missing from the yeshiva one day. And he discovered later that he went to a soccer match. So he went over to the student and he said, I understand that you were at the soccer match. You didn't come to yeshiva today. You went to watch the game. He admitted he did. So the rabbi said, tell me about the game. Told him this X amount of players on each team. They have to get goals. And he explained the game to the rabbi. Then the rabbi said, let me ask you, does the other team, the team you weren't rooting for, did they show up in the middle of the night? He said, of course not. They're only there during the game, during the day. So he said, so why don't the players of your team show up in the middle of the night when the team is not there and score a lot of goals? And the student looked like the rabbi, like I thought you were a smart man, Rabbi. He's thinking to himself, like, don't you understand? The whole point of the game is that someone's trying to block you from getting a goal. And if you could get around the defense and get the ball in the net, then you deserve a score. But if you come in the middle of the night and you just kick the balls in the net, that's not winning. And the rabbi said, listen to what you're saying, that the whole challenge is to win when there's someone opposing you, when there's someone's trying to stand in your way. He said, you know when the most important day to learn is? When there's a soccer match, because that's the day your Yetzer Hara is trying to oppose you from learning and challenge you from learning and saying, no, you should go watch the game. And if you could overcome your Yetzer Hara and stay and learn on such a day and not go to the game and resist the temptation and the urge to go to the game, then you're a winner. And that's why God gave us the Yetzer Hara. If we didn't have evil inclination, we wouldn't be human. We would be angels. And while it sounds very good to be an angel, there's no joy and pleasure in being an angel because the angel didn't achieve anything. An angel is just going about its spiritual day and has no other contrary desires or interests. But we human beings do. We have bodies and souls, unlike angels that don't have bodies. And therefore we have physical desires and physical needs and physical urges and so on and so forth. So what is the three-prong approach to dealing with Esav? Not just the Esav meaning anti-Semites, but the Esav from within. The first thing is presence. What does presence mean? Gifts. We have to offer up presence, meaning we have to take care of our body. We have to eat, we have to drink, we have to sleep, we have to exercise. We can't starve it, we can't negate it, we can't ignore it. Esav, meaning the Yetzer Hara, yeah, there's a certain amount I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you 3 good meals a day. I'm going to give you 8 hours sleep. I'm going to give you your exercise every day. Maybe some fun, some entertainment, as long as it's kosher, proper, entertainment and enjoyment. By all means, you're a body. I respect you. You're Esav. You need what you need. I'm not going to try to break you or reject you. I welcome your presence, and I want to take good care of you, and I want to lavish you with the gifts that you need as a human body. I respect who you are, and that's step one. Step one is recognizing, listen, I got to live in peace with my brother. My body is my brother. I have to take care of him. It's my body. And it doesn't only refer to the body. It goes much deeper than this. It refers to things that are human nature. Sometimes we expect too much from ourselves. That's right. Sometimes we forget we're human beings. We think we're angels. And we get disappointed at ourselves for not being maybe capable of doing more. And we have to remember, I'm a human being. And I could give you a lot of examples. One is what it says in Pirkei Avot. Ethics of Our Father says, Lo alacha hamla. Rabbi Tarfon said, Lo alacha hamlacha ligmar. It's not your job to finish the task. But v'lo ata ben chorin lihibatel mimenu. You're not free from desisting of doing your part. Meaning, sometimes we feel overwhelmed. It's too much, too difficult. How can I do this myself? Comes Rabbi Tarfon and says, you're right. You're one person. There's only so much you can do. You want to save the world. You want to help everyone. You want to solve all the problems. But you can only do what you can do. You're a human being with human limitations. But don't think that because you can't complete the job, that you don't have to do your utmost. So we have to accept our human condition. We have to give presence. Presence means we have to make certain concessions, moral concessions, ethical concessions, not, God forbid, immoral and unethical concessions, but the moral concessions. I'll give you another example. Take, for example, anger. So there are 3 stages to anger. The first stage is anger, the feeling you get angry. Somebody does something that offends you, that hurts you, that insults you, betrays you, whatever it is, you feel anger. That's something you can't control. So if you get angry, disappointed in yourself, why did I get angry? Why can't I rise above it? Why do I have to get affected by it? Because you're a human being. We're human beings. We do get affected by these things. Somebody hurts you, you're going to feel angry. You're going to feel upset. That's normal. However, this stage 2 is rage. Rage is how you react. You start yelling, you start screaming, you take revenge against the person. That's where you have control. You can't control how you feel, but how you react to that feeling, that's your free will. And then, of course, the third stage of anger is resentment. How long are you going to hold on to the anger? That you have a choice. Are you going to let go of it or not? As someone once said, holding a grudge and carrying resentment is like letting your enemy live inside your head without paying rent. Why would you let your enemy live inside your head without paying rent? You wouldn't let him live in your house without paying rent. Why would you let him live in your head without paying rent? So there are certain things that we have to understand. This is my human need. I need to sleep. I need to eat. I have normal human needs. And that's the gifts that Yaakov gives to Esau. Then, of course, we have the second component of dealing with our Yetzer Hara. Again, the Yetzer Hara are those negative thoughts, feelings, impulses, desires, weaknesses, insecurities, everything else that attacks us. And that is prayer, because our rabbis tell us when the Yetzer Hara attacks you, you should drag him into the synagogue because his powers are weakened in the synagogue. Meaning when you come into a holy environment, if you feel Yetzer Hara is trying to tempt you, trying to overcome you, you know where you should negotiate with him? In the synagogue. Because when you're surrounded by prayer, by Torah study, you will have the upper hand and he will have the lower hand, the underhand, the weaker hand. And finally, the last thing is war. That at the end of the day, you have to be willing to fight. There are certain times that we're overcome with certain improper thoughts, feelings, desires, impulses to do certain things that are wrong. And it's tough. And you have to make a choice. And you have to be willing to put up a good fight, like Yaakov was willing to put up a good fight to overpower that Yetzer Hara and to win the battle and win the conflict and win the war. So I just want you to understand that this Yaakov-Esau dynamic is not just between Jews and non-Jews or anti-Semites or enemies of the Jews like Jacob and Esau. Yes, it is that too, but it's also the daily struggle that we all go through within ourselves. So this Torah portion has many, many fascinating episodes. So now Yaakov realizes he has to fight his brother or confront his brother. His brother's coming to kill him. And the night before he meets his brother, the Torah tells us about an encounter. And this encounter is so significant that until this day, we collectively as a Jewish people carry which name? Yisrael. We know there's Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. Who is Israel? When we say I'm going to Israel, Israel is Yisrael. Who is Yisrael? Yisrael is Jacob. Jacob was given a new name in this week's Torah portion. Where was he given a new name? The night before he encounters his brother, he's attacked by a mysterious person, which our rabbis say was actually not a person. It was the angel Gabriel who attacks him and wrestles with him all night long. This is an all-night scuttle. And in the morning, Jacob overpowers him and pins him to the ground. And the angel says, let me go. I need to go now. It's time to go sing the morning praises to God. I need to be released. And Jacob says to the angel, I will not release you. I will not let you go until you bless me. And the angel says to Jacob, what is your name? He says, my name is Yaakov, Jacob. So he says, your name shall no longer be Jacob, it should be Israel. Why? Because the word Yisrael means you have wrestled with man and with God, meaning an angel of God, and you have prevailed. You wrestled with your brother, with your uncle, and now with me, and you are a man who prevails over others who wrestle with you, who challenge you, and therefore your name is Yisrael. So Yisrael represents the dominant name of succeeding, of prevailing, of struggling, of wrestling with man and with God. Now you may say, why would he ask for a blessing from someone who attacks him? Because it wasn't an ordinary mugger, it was an angel, so he wanted a blessing. But here lies a very, very beautiful, eternal message to all of us. The Torah is telling us that in life we all have battles, we all have struggles, we all have to deal with different challenges that confront us. And we wrestle with man, meaning human interaction, struggles, challenges in the physical, but also spiritual. We struggle with our questions about faith and with the divine, wrestling with God, which is a Jewish tradition. Abraham wrestled with God, Moses, everyone, all the great Jewish leaders argued with God and debated God. Abraham with Sodom and Gomorrah, Moses after the worshiping of the golden calf pleads for forgiveness. So we go through different struggles in life, different challenges, different hardships. And often people say, why? Why couldn't life be a little easier? Why do I have to go through all of this? And here's the message of Jacob. Jacob message is we don't know why we're attacked, so to speak. We don't know why these things are thrust upon us. But one thing we know, that before we let them go, we have to demand a blessing. What does that mean? That it's not enough to overcome the challenges of life. You have to extract the blessings from it. You have to say, if I went through this challenge, if I had to go through this wrestling match, if I had to battle this put up this fight against whatever it is, illness or financial troubles or relationship troubles or children, whatever it may be, bless me. Let me leave with a blessing. Let me become better, more elevated, more sublime and perfected as a result of it. Let this challenge bring out the blessing in my life. Let it be a source of blessing for the future, so that it was not just a struggle in vain. I mean, we're all collectively going through COVID-19 right now. When it's over, God willing, in the next months, 2021, we're going to see the vaccine rolled out. We can't just look back and say we survived COVID. That's not enough. We have to say, what was the blessing of COVID? What did we take out of it? Like Jacob, we have to demand the blessing. We have to make sure that we don't walk away empty-handed. We don't just want things to go back to normal, but things should be better than normal as a result of having gone through this experience, which occupied a year of our lives. So that is the message of Jacob when he says to the angel, bless me before you go. And he doesn't release him until he gets a blessing from him. And yes, that's what the point is. The point is that someone just wrote in the chat box, and if you have any comments, feel free to type it in. Someone said that we always have to ask ourselves, what is God trying to teach us from this experience that we go through? So finally, miracle of miracles, after that encounter, Jacob is injured. He's struck in the hip by the angel and he's limping, and the Torah says till this very day we don't eat the gid hanasheh. The gid hanasheh is the sciatica nerve in the hind quarter of the animal. We have to remove it because that's where Jacob was struck. And we have to always remember this story. Why? Obviously for the positive lesson that we became Yisrael as a result of the story, and also for the negative lesson. Our rabbis say that Jacob was left alone, is the way the story began. Where were his 11 sons who were strong and healthy and young? Why were they not with their father, which allowed their father to be susceptible and succumb to the attack of the angel? So the answer is that he went back to retrieve some items. Our rabbis tell us that he left in a previous campsite. But why didn't they escort him? And therefore the lesson is, from not eating the sciatica nerve in the back of the animal, that we should never leave not just our elderly parents, but any elderly Jews, but not even elderly, anyone who's weak or vulnerable or in a precarious situation. We have to make sure that no Jew is alone, not physically, not emotionally, spiritually alone. We have to look out for each other. So finally, the brothers meet, and guess what? Jacob bows 7 times to his brother to show him tremendous honor. And the heart of Esav is melted. He sees his wives and his children, and he runs towards him, and he hugs him, and he kisses him, and he falls on his shoulder, and he cries. So Esav, who was out to kill him, is now kissing him and crying. And there's dots on top of the word Vayishlach. He kissed him both in the Torah and in the Chumash, which teaches us that the rabbis say that at that moment he was overcome with love and compassion and forgiveness for his brother. It was a genuine kiss. That's one opinion. There's a second opinion, Rashi, just that the dots are saying that he didn't kiss him with a whole heart. But either way, there was a degree of love and forgiveness. And the question is, what brought it about? Well, the simple thing that brought it about was the diplomacy that Jacob sent him these gifts, and he showed him this honor, and he bowed down to him, and he made him, humbled himself in front of his brother. But I heard once an interpretation that said that, Jacob and Esau were twins. We can't forget that, right? And when he saw his twin brother, a lot of times people go to reunions, school reunions, 25 years after high school or whatever it is, 30 years, they go to a reunion. And the kids that were in their class from high school, now they see them as grown men with children and sometimes even older. And they look at life and they say, wow, look at where all these years went. And perhaps Jacob looked at his brother, Esau looked at his brother, and he saw his whole family, and he realized that he's not the same kid that left home, 22 years earlier. He's now a father, he has wives, he has children. And the passage of time really made him realize that they had lost out on all this time, all these 22 years, that they were not together because he had to run from his brother because he wanted to kill him. He didn't get to see his brother get married and have children and what they had lost as a result of their conflict. And perhaps that inspired him, awakened him to say, we've been at odds too long. We've missed out so much of life. And now at least let's make peace at this point. And that's really the unfortunate tragedy. Sometimes you hear stories of situations where brothers are not speaking to brothers or parents are not speaking to children or whatever it may be, and God willing, they should always find a way, like Jacob and Esau, to make peace. But even when you do make peace, all the years that you miss out of being there for each other's happy occasions, for the celebrations of life, that's something you can never retrieve. And therefore, a person should realize that it's not worth sacrificing a relationship, no matter how hurt someone is and how offended they are and disappointed in the other person. Never give up on a relationship of love, because you can never get that back. Parents should never abandon children, no matter what the situation is. Children should never abandon their parents, brothers and sisters. Family is meant to stay together and be there for each other unconditionally, with unconditional love, no matter what the circumstances are. Again, if it's a situation where, God forbid, there's abuse or other things, then it's necessary. But short of that, you don't want to look back and say, look at all the years that we missed out on being there for each other. And perhaps when Esau saw that, it awoke in him a sense of a love for his brother. So that, thank God, resolves the conflict between the two brothers. But then we go on to another amazing story in this week's Torah portion. And I just also want to point out one thing before we get to the next story. I'm now right before chapter 34 in the Torah portion of Vayishlach. I was about to start chapter 34, but I have to add one other thing. After he makes peace with his brother, he leaves that encounter of making peace with his brother, and the next verse says, Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Ir Shechem. Jacob arrived complete, shalem from the word shalom, wholesome, in the city of Shechem. We all know where Shechem is, Nablus, right? And our rabbis wonder, what does it mean he arrived whole? So Rashi gives one interpretation that his body had healed from the limp that he had from the interaction with the angel. The angel struck him in the hip. He was limping. He was healed. But the literal explanation is that for some reason at this point he's whole. And the obvious answer is because no matter how many blessings Jacob had, he had wives, he had children, he had wealth, he had success, he had everything going for him. But if he's not at peace with his own brother, he didn't feel whole, he didn't feel complete. Now that he made peace with his brother, for the first time the Torah says Jacob arrives shalem, he's whole, he's complete, because he resolved the conflict with his brother. Now we come to the story of chapter 34. And this is, again, a very important story. Again, every story in the Torah is important, but this story is referenced later, and Jacob's deathbed, he talks about the story. And it's a horrible story. It's a story of rape. Basically, Jacob's daughter, his only daughter, goes out to see what's going on in the land, because they came to this place called Shechem. And the prince of the land, his name was Shechem, the son of Hamor, sees this beautiful girl, Dinah. He takes her by force. And the Torah says, Vayishkav osa vayaneha. He slept with her and he violated her. But now his soul, his heart became attached to Dinah, meaning he was infatuated with Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. Imagine, the daughter of Jacob was violated, and he loves her, and he speaks to the girl. I want you to marry me. I want you to stay with me. So Shechem then goes to his father, who is the ruler of the land, and he says, go talk to this girl's father about letting me marry his daughter. And Jacob now discovers through the messenger, through Shechem coming to talk to him, that his daughter Dinah was defiled, violated. And when he learns about this, when Hamor comes to discuss this with him, his children at the moment happen to be out in the field tending to the flock. So Yaakov remains silent until they return. They come back from the field and they hear the news that their sister was abducted and raped, violated, and they are furious. How can someone do this to our only sister, to the daughter of Jacob from such a family? Such a thing should never ever happen. And here we come to the story where the brothers say, now one of the things is that they were still holding on to Dinah. Dinah was still in captivity. In other words, they didn't release her. They kept her. Shechem was holding her by force. And the father came to talk about marriage. So the brothers want to get their sister back. So what do? But they go a lot further than that, as you know. They say, Hamor says to the brothers, listen, my son Shechem, he loves your daughter, your sister. Why don't you give her in marriage to my son? And not only that, we'll marry your children. You can take our sons as husbands, or daughters as wives. We'll take your children. We'll intermarry. We'll live peacefully together, and you can live in our land and enjoy all the blessings and prosperity of the land. So this is where, and Shechem says, look, I'll give you wealth, I'll give you gifts, I'll give you jewelry, whatever you want. Just let us take your daughter. And here's where the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes, or 11, because Benjamin wasn't born yet, respond to Shechem and his father. with trickery. And they say to him, listen, we can't do this. We can't allow our sister to marry a man that's not circumcised, because our tradition is that all men have to be circumcised. But if you want our society, our family to marry into your culture, your society, your people, if you want our religions to come together, then you have to circumcise all the males in your city. And then our daughters can marry them, and your daughters can marry us, and we can live as one nation in peace, but only if you're circumcised. But if you don't circumcise yourselves, then we can't agree to this marriage. We have to take our daughter back and call it off. Well, Hamor and his son Shechem were like, sure, no problem. That's all you want, circumcision, great. To marry Dinah, he'll do anything, because he loved her so much. He desired her so much. So what does Shechem and his father Hamor do? They come back to the city and they tell all the people of the city, these people, these Jews, family of Jacob, they're good with us. They want to live peacefully with us. And therefore, they want to settle in our land, and there's enough room for them in our land, and we should take their daughters for our sons, and our sons for their daughters. Everyone should get married together. But there's one condition. They want that we should circumcise all our men, and therefore everyone has to go about circumcising themselves. And here's what happens. On the third day, after they had circumcised themselves, which is the most painful day, two of Jacob's sons, Shimon and Levi, go with their swords, and they go into the city and they kill all the males who had circumcised themselves. They couldn't defend themselves, obviously. And they kill Hamor and his son Shechem as well, Shechem being the one who abducted her and raped their sister. And they retrieve their daughter, their sister Dinah, out of the house of Shechem, and they leave. And they wipe out the whole city that defiled, or at least they, not personally, but they consented to what was being done. They covered and supported their leader, their ruler, in his actions. And when Yaakov learns about what Shimon and Levi did, which they did not ask his permission or consult with him, he said to his children, you've made our family vulnerable now, because we're a small family, few in number, and if they band together and attack us in retribution for what we did, we will be annihilated. And the brothers, Shimon and Levi, respond to their father and say, should we let our sister be treated like Should we let our sister be treated like a harlot? How could we allow our sister to be treated this way? She was raped. She was violated. We had to do this. Now, I mentioned to you that later Jacob on his deathbed addresses this story. And when he gives the blessings to his children, he says, Shimon and Levi, I'm going to scatter you out in Israel. I don't want you to live together, because when you guys get together, with your anger, you wiped out a whole city. And he rebukes them for their impetuous response, in which they acted out of anger, he said, and wiped out a whole city, instead of just killing Shechem and his father maybe and getting Dinah back, killing all the males of the city. There was a great Hasidic Rabbi, Rabbi Yonasan Eibschutz. He once said, if the brothers wanted to create a ruse to get their sister back, why did they have to say, circumcise yourselves? Why didn't they just say, you need a fast for 3 days, and then on the third day, when they have no energy, come and take their sister out? Or even if they want to wipe out the city, why circumcision? So he said this a little bit, tongue-in-cheek, but there's a lot of truth to it, unfortunately. He said that they knew what we know till today, that when someone kills anyone else, the whole world is up in arms. But if you kill Jews, people don't protest. It's almost like it's okay if it's Jews. If they're circumcised, they're Jews, it's okay. So he said, okay, first circumcise yourself. Like us Jews, become one of us. And then we can wipe you out, because no one's going to say anything. Like I said, it's a little bit of he said it tongue in cheek, but there's some truth to it, that there's a double standard in the way Jews are treated and the way others are treated, of course. We now come to the next story in this week's Torah portion, which is found, if you're in the Blue Article Chumash, on page 188. And again, this is the story of the birth of Benjamin, the last child of Jacob, with his wife Rachel, and the burial of Rachel. If you've ever been to the tomb of Rachel, you know where it is. It's on the road at Bethlehem, Bederach Ephrata, on the way to Ephrat. And she was buried there because she died there as Jacob was returning home with his family. And she died in childbirth. So we all know the story. We read it last week. Rachel could not have children. She was barren. She was infertile. And finally, she had one son, Joseph. And when she had that son, Joseph, she said, Yosef Hashem, may God increase for me another child. So she prayed for her second child. And finally, she is now, what happened to Dinah? Dinah was retrieved and brought back to the family and continues on the journey with Jacob and his family. So now, Rachel is giving birth, and the Torah tells us that she started to have some complications during her pregnancy, and tragically, she was starting to depart from the complications. And the midwife says to Rachel, as she is delivering the baby and having great difficulty in birth, the midwife says, don't have no fear, because you're having another son. And so she's notified that she's giving birth to a son. This was her second son, after Joseph, her second son. And then the verse says that as her soul was departing, she's passing away, and she's about to die, she names this child. And what does she name him? Ben-Oni. Now we're going to talk about what Ben-Oni means, but she calls him Ben-Oni. Had she gotten her way, there would be the 12 tribes of Israel, and it would be Joseph and Ben-Oni. But the father says, no, I'm going to give him a different name. Binyamin, Benjamin. At that point, Rachel dies, and she's buried along the road at Bethlehem. And Jacob erects a monument, which is the monument of the tomb of Rachel till this very day. Now, this is a very interesting story. Why? Because, everyone knows that when you have children, husband and wife have to talk about what are you going to name the child, and you bounce different names around and you agree upon a name. But sometimes there's a tradition that, the man gets this name, the wife gets the first name, the second name goes to the husband. Different customs how to decide on the names. The story, this husband and wife comes to the rabbi the night before the bris of their child, and they say, Rabbi, we need your help. We've been fighting for the past 8 days what to name the baby. We can't agree. So the rabbi says, okay, turns to the father, what do you want to name the baby? He said, I want to name the baby Chaim. Okay, very good. And he turns to the wife, what do you want to name the baby? She says, I want to name him Chaim. So the rabbi says, what's the problem? You both agree, you both want Chaim. So she says, no. He wants the name Chaim after his father, who was a despicable person, a crook, a cheat, a liar, a reprehensible person. I want to name after my father. Chaim was a tzaddik, a righteous man, a kind-hearted man, a generous man, a loving man. So we're fighting which Chaim to name after. So the rabbi says, okay, I'll tell you what to do. Why don't you name the baby Chaim? And when he grows up, we'll see whether he was named after her father or his father, depending on how he lives, right? So namings are very important. The Sephardim actually name after the living. Ashkenazim only name after the deceased. But here she chose a name for her child, Ben-Oni. And Jacob said, no, we're going to call him Binyamin. And that's the name that sticks. That's the name we go with till today. The question is, how insensitive. Your wife is dying in childbirth. She's giving up her life to give birth to this baby. She's not going to tragically live to see this child live out his life. Her last words before she dies is, I want to call him Ben-Oni. And Ben Yaakov, instead of saying, sure, my darling, anything you want, whatever you want, for sure. He says, no. He argues with her. We're going to call him Binyamin. Is this the time to argue with your wife while she's giving birth and she's about to die? So there's many, many ways to understand this conversation. Let's start with one. One is that, what does Ben-Oni mean? So in Hebrew, the same word could have multiple meanings. One meaning is Oni could mean deception. Second meaning of Oni could mean affliction. And the third definition of Oni could mean my vigor. So if you remember in last week's Torah portion, when Laban ran after Jacob, Laban said to Jacob, why did you steal my gods? Meaning that when they left the home, someone stole Laban's idols, his statues. And Jacob says, no one's took your gods. God forbid. We would never steal your gods, your idols. And Jacob says, whoever stole your idols should not live, meaning like a curse, because nobody here would have done it. And the Torah said Jacob didn't know that Rachel stole them because she didn't want her father to worship idols. And she hid it under her seat. And she said, when he started to search, she said, I'm having my menstrual cycle. I can't get up. And our rabbi said, because he uttered these words, and a righteous person utters words, they came true. And that's why she died prematurely. So now you have Jacob and Rachel had the most loving relationship. We know that he worked 7 years and then another 7 years to marry her. And as she's dying, he feels terrible because he knows that it was the words he spoke that's causing it. So she says to him, don't feel bad. It's not your doing. It's my doing. It's the child of my deception. It's because I stole the idols of my father. And he says, no, don't take the blame on yourself. Don't feel guilty for what you did. It's not your fault. Benjamin, right hand. Benjamin from the right hand. Why? Because when you took an oath, you took it with your right hand. He said it was because of my words. Each one is reassuring the other one that it wasn't their fault. The other's fault, it was their fault. They're taking responsibility. That was the loving interaction and disagreement they were having. Another interpretation is Ben-Oni could mean the son of my affliction. She's saying, look, I'm giving up my life in childbirth. And I'm very concerned because I won't be around as a mother to raise my son, to raise him properly, to make sure that he grows up to be a good human being, because I won't be there to protect him and to watch over him, to educate him and to teach him properly. So at this point, Yaakov says to his wife, don't worry, Benjamin, he'll be the son of my right hand, meaning I will watch over him. I will make sure that he grows up properly, that you'll look down from heaven and have nachas from him, because he will be the type of son that will make you proud, because I will make sure he's the son of my right hand. Another interpretation, by the way, Rashi gives is Binyamin, the one born in the south, because he was the only child of the 12 tribes of Israel that was born in Israel. The other ones were all born in the city of Haran. And another interpretation is that she was saying he's the son of my grief, of my sorrow, because he died during childbirth. And Yaakov says, no, Binyamin could also mean that he will be Ben-Oni. Oni could also mean my first strength, my vigor, that he will be the son of my vigor, that I will watch over him and make sure that he grows up to be everything that a mother could hope for and wish for. So that is the story of the birth of Benjamin, the youngest son of Rachel, the only brother of Joseph. And finally, at the end of this week's Torah portion, we have a very, very difficult story, another very difficult story. And then after that, we have the actual passing of Isaac. And Isaac dies at the age of 180, and he's buried by his son Yaakov in the cave of Machpelah. But there is another very difficult story, and that is that after Rachel dies, the verse says Reuven went. Again, Reuven is the oldest son of Jacob, the son of Leah, and he lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Now, what does this mean? If you take it literally, it means that, God forbid, he slept with his stepmother or with his father's wife. But that's not the way our Rashi explains it. Rashi says that Jacob loved Rachel, and his bed was permanently or in the tent of Rachel. But now that Rachel died, Reuven thought, okay, now that Rachel died, which was the woman that Yaakov loved the most, surely Yaakov will move his bed into the tent of his mother, which was Leah. But Yaakov, after Rachel died, chose the tent of Bilhah for his bed, which was the concubine of his wife Rachel, rather than Leah. And this offended Reuven. It's one thing that my mother had to take a back seat to her sister during her lifetime, but now that Rachel died, shouldn't she come before Bilhah? And so he moved the bed from the tent of Bilhah into the tent of his mother Leah. And it says Yaakov heard, which is an interesting thing. The Torah doesn't say what his response was. It just says he heard. Sometimes you're so upset, so disappointed that you can't even say anything about it. He was so perturbed by what his son had done to interfere in his bed, in his intimate space, and take his bed out of Bilhah's tent and put it in his mother's tent, that he just couldn't respond. He kept quiet, but he carried this disappointment, this resentment. Later, again, just like he rebuked Shimon and Levi for wiping out the inhabitants of the city of Shechem, he says to Reuven on his deathbed, you should have been the firstborn. You should have gotten the honor of being the firstborn son and all the privileges, but you blew it. How did you blow it? Because you were unstable like water, and you reconfigured the arrangements of your father's bed. And for interfering in the private life of your parents, your father, for that you show that you're not capable of being the leader of the Jewish people, and Judah becomes the leader of the brothers. And Reuven, just if you see his MO, his track record, he's always a person who's trying to do the right thing. He's doing what he thinks is right to protect the honor of his mother. And then later with Joseph in the pit, he's the only brother who takes pity on Joseph and doesn't want to sell him into slavery or kill him. He says, just put him in the pit thinking he'll come back and rescue him later. But later it was too late because they'd already sold him as a slave. But Reuven's a person who has good intentions and good ideas and has a good heart. But unfortunately, he doesn't know how to execute properly. He acts too impetuously, too rash, and not thought out and calculated well. And that's why, although he means well, he doesn't end up becoming the leader of the Jewish of the tribes of Israel. So there's a lot of fascinating stories in this week's Torah portion, but overall, all ends well as Yaakov and Esav are once again at peace with each other, and Yaakov returns home to his parents' home, to the land of Israel, in peace. And as God had told him that he would come back intact, he would come back complete, he would come back whole and even blessed and successful, he accomplished his mission of building a family and accumulating great wealth. And now he comes back and he's able to restore the harmonial peace between him and his brother. And that is the Torah portion of Vayishlach, of this week's Torah portion. So I want to wish everyone a wonderful day, and thank you all for joining. If you have any questions, you could type them in right now. Let's see if we have any comments or questions. You're welcome. My pleasure. If we don't have any questions, we wish everyone a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Tonight, we're having a very special Zoom with the Cuban Jewish community in Cuba, learning about past, present, and future, the Jews of Cuba. So please Zoom in tonight at 7 o'clock. That promises to be very fascinating. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Shalom.